And I would just say, Google Deborah Pageant in Love Me Tender. Okay. And you will see exactly what I am talking about when I tell you that Priscilla and Deborah looked eerily alike. It's quite crazy. When around 8 o'clock they pulled up in front of the ordinary looking 2-story house that Elvis was occupying, a miraculous transformation occurred. Priscilla stepped out of the car, removed her bubblegum, and became a different person. There were clearly psychological and emotional undercurrents to the attraction within Elvis, for he felt instantly intimate with Priscilla in a manner that surprised even her. He was very lonely over there, she said, in the 70s, and he wanted to talk to someone, and he trusted me. For some reason, he really trusted me, and he poured his heart out. I look back now and I go, my gosh, I was so young, and I was only 14 years old. How did that trust develop? I mean, how? Why did he? But he did. That she was a young girl, a stranger, sharing intimacies with a 24-year-old international movie star. She was the practical one in the relationship, even then. I mean, at this point, who cares if Priscilla were to write in a book that, you know what, my parents were starstruck and they pushed me into something that they probably shouldn't have, being a young, impressionable 14-year-old girl, that maybe I wasn't protected in the way that I needed to be at that time. But yet, so many accounts in these books and in these interviews that the author gave are telling us that that wasn't the case, that she was indeed infatuated with him. Like, why not just say, I was infatuated with Elvis. I was head over heels in love with him when I first heard his records and saw him on television. I was, he was everything to me. He was my fantasy come true. Meeting him, it was such a thing. It's like she's so intent on making, in my opinion, this is all my opinion, but she's so intent on, dying on this sword of just, she's this calm, cool, collected, virginal girl from this strict family and kind of didn't want any of this. And it was just kind of thrown in her lap. What would it do to her reputation if indeed she did hotly pursue Elvis, right? Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Jennifer. I am so happy to have you back. We are on episode 10 of Child Bride by Suzanne Finstad. This is the untold story of Priscilla Beaulieu Presley. We've gone through 9 chapters and now we are on the chapter 10 recap. And this one is called Imagine If the Fantasy Comes True. Now, in this episode, finally, Priscilla Beaulieu is going to meet her future husband, Elvis Presley. The stage is set. It's 1959 in Germany, and Elvis is in the middle of a 2-year stint in the army overseas. Now, if you have not caught up to this point, I would strongly, strongly encourage you to get on this playlist. There's a lot to unpack, even all the way up to where Priscilla meets Elvis. The reason why there's so much to go through is because Priscilla is a very mysterious and complex individual, in my opinion, and she is very secretive, and she has a very carefully curated narrative that she has perpetuated in the public domain for almost 5 decades now. I think it is 5 decades. And she seems very, very hell-bent on just maintaining the narrative. And the narrative is that when she met him, she was pretty indifferent to Elvis. She was a fan, but she wasn't a mega fan. And also that she was a virgin on her wedding night. And that is one of the main driving stories that has been in Elvis Priscilla lore for decades, perpetuated mainly by Priscilla herself. And that is the story that Child Bride aims to punch holes in. Suzanne Finstad, the author of Child Bride, interviewed over 300 people for this book, going really way back. I'm talking to Priscilla's elementary school teachers in Texas. It's crazy how far she went back. And in the last chapter, we explored the hotly contested relationship between the man that introduced Priscilla to Elvis, a man by the name of CURRIE Grant. And it's a pretty dark and, in my opinion, despairing story. The basis for the controversy between CURRIE and Priscilla is that CURRIE maintains that he used Priscilla in an intimate manner to get what he wanted from her because he knew she wanted desperately to meet Elvis when she found out that CURRIE knew Elvis. And he maintains that he used her, and then when he got what he wanted from Priscilla, he then took her to meet Elvis. Priscilla hotly denies this, has denied this for decades. Priscilla even sued CURRIE in regards to this story when she found out the direction that Suzanne Finstad, the author, was taking in this story. Now, Priscilla did win that defamation lawsuit from CURRIE Grant. I did an entire video that I will link for you rather than go into this exhausting story yet again, because again, I made a whole video about it. But basically, on its face, you would think, okay, she filed the defamation lawsuit, she won, Priscilla's telling the truth, CURRIE's not telling the truth, right? Like that's what you would assume, but there's so much more underneath. It's like an onion that you have to peel back. And there was an Elvis researcher named Alana Nash in the 2000s that unearthed documents detailing a confidential arrangement that CURRIE and Priscilla entered into regarding how they were exactly going to settle this lawsuit. And it turns out that CURRIE didn't have to pay a red cent to Priscilla because she initially sued him for millions of dollars. He didn't have to pay a red cent to her as per this confidentiality agreement, as long as he never spoke of Priscilla publicly again. Now, to me, that's not too convincing. And when you read Child Bride, you really start to unravel and unpack the mystery of Priscilla's secretive persona. So I go into all of the details regarding that lawsuit. I go into why I really don't believe that even though she won that defamation lawsuit, I still really don't, in my opinion, believe Priscilla's account of the narrative. Her story has shifted, at least according to the author in her research and documentation, at least 3 different times to the author herself. And over the years, Priscilla has given conflicting narratives about the circumstances regarding her and CURRIE's relationship, around the circumstances and timeline as to, when she first arrived in Germany to when she met Elvis. It's just a lot of murkiness. And this is even up until the point where she hadn't even met Elvis yet. So in the last chapter, we went into, again, disturbing detail, CURRIE's account of how he essentially used Priscilla, got what he wanted from her, and then and only then did he make the decision to take her to Elvis's home to meet him. Priscilla, again, hotly contests this, file that lawsuit of defamation against him. And it's very interesting because the author Suzanne Finstad had Priscilla Presley and CURRIE Grant at her home in May 1996 and got on tape the argument between CURRIE and Priscilla, all the ping-ponging and back and forth. CURRIE, laying it out, saying, I remember this, I remember that. And basically Priscilla saying, nope, you have the wrong girl. This never happened. And again, what I find very convincing, unfortunately, for CURRIE, is that his accounts never wavered. And, beyond that, what would CURRIE stand to gain by revealing all of this information, other than making himself look like a complete and total slimeball and just completely mar and destroy his own reputation decades after the fact, right? I mean, what do you think that would have done to his children, his family, after that comes out, hearing that? But he admitted to all of it. He said that he wasn't proud of the behavior, but that's just what he did. So all of this is detailed in the last episode, but I thought it was really important to just get you a little bit up to speed before we get into chapter 10. The other little bit of housekeeping I wanted to say before we started into this chapter is, last episode, I incorrectly named the mother of Donna Presley, who is Elvis Presley's first cousin, who has a channel here on YouTube. I incorrectly named her mother as Gladys Presley, not Nash Presley. Donna Presley, again, is the first cousin of Elvis. Donna's mother, Nash Presley, was the sister of Vernon Presley, who was Elvis's father. So in the video, I said that Donna's mother was named Gladys, when that is not true. Donna actually has an aunt Gladys because Vernon himself also had a sister named Gladys, but Gladys is not Donna's mother. Nash is Donna's mother. And as we all know, Vernon Presley married Gladys Love Presley and had 2 twin boys, Jesse and Elvis. Unfortunately, Jesse was stillborn, died about 30 minutes after childbirth. Tragically, Elvis ended up being an only child, grew up very, very close to his parents, Gladys and Vernon. So sorry for that little bit of confusion there. So as we get into Child Bride now, I do have the book, but I also have it on Kindle, and I've got some parts highlighted that I am going to read for you. Now, as you know, I am not reading Child Bride word for word. That is very dangerous and murky territory here on YouTube. You do not want to do that. You don't want strikes against your work that you're doing. And so what we're doing here is recaps, me offering you a summary of what we're reading here. And yes, I will read some excerpts, but I actually have linked the book underneath the video. So if you did want to get the book and follow along with me, I think you should do that. That would be really fun. And there's been quite a few of you in the comments that have said that you've got the book and you're reading along with me. So let's get started. Chapter 10, Imagine If. This is the big one, you guys. This is when Priscilla meets Elvis. Now, Suzanne Finstad starts out the chapter by telling us that the exact date that Priscilla met Elvis, Priscilla herself never could even pinpoint that to the author, Suzanne. Now, Suzanne and Priscilla had been in interview and communication with each other up to a certain point into Suzanne's research and writing of the book. And I've talked about this in other episodes. Once Priscilla saw the depth of the research that Suzanne was going through to really get an accurate portrayal of who Priscilla was, she withdrew her consent from the book and she decided to no longer cooperate with Suzanne. Now, remember when I told you at the beginning of the episode that Pricilla Presley sued CURRIE Grant for defamation based on the conversation that her and CURRIE had in Suzanne Finstad's, the author's living room, and that heated debate that the two of them had about the nature of their relationship. So, Priscilla decides to go and sue CURRIE, but Suzanne never sued the author, Suzanne Finstad, nor Suzanne's publisher, the publisher of Child Bride. So that's also something very interesting to just stick in your head and remember. And another interesting story was after Priscilla and CURRIE got into that argument at the author's home, she talks about how Priscilla was so frazzled and so upset when she left Suzanne's home that evening that she got in a car accident on her way home, according to the author. So all very, very interesting. So Suzanne finds it a bit puzzling that Priscilla could never actually pinpoint the date that she met Elvis to Suzanne. So Suzanne's like, what teenager, starstruck teenager, wouldn't remember the exact date? So Suzanne Finstad is a bit puzzled and puts forth in the book that it seems that Priscilla went to great lengths to obscure the exact date when she met Elvis. She could never reveal that to Suzanne and was kind of ambivalent about it, as if, she just can't remember. She's just kind of always said over the years that she met Elvis pretty quickly after she arrived in Germany, within a few weeks. And the author is like, I've interviewed several people in Germany, and one of them was a classmate by the name of Helen de la Hunt, who remembered Priscilla dating a friend of Helen's brother shortly after Priscilla arrived in Germany. And to do that, you would have to enroll in school in September and be there for a bit in order to meet a boy and start going around with him, right? So there's always these things that the author is unearthing that only serve to refute Priscilla's account and sequence of events. And it's crazy how far into detail Suzanne goes. She even talks about that school started for Priscilla on September 10th, 1959. So if it's indeed true, this classmate, Helen of Priscilla's, that's being interviewed by Suzanne, has a brother whose friend is casually dating Priscilla. It has to be after school starts. But again, when you read Priscilla's interviews, you read her book, you listen to her talk, it's like she didn't know anybody. She met Elvis very, very soon after arriving in Germany. Why? Why such an obscure, hidden timeline? Well, the author maintains that there is a very solid reason why Priscilla wants to be ambivalent about it, wants to kind of obscure those details. Because the more weeks that were in between her arriving in Germany and her meeting Elvis gives more credibility to CURRIE Grant's account, which is he was basically grooming her for weeks in order to get what he wanted from her, according to CURRIE, allegedly. So yes, all very tricky stuff. So in the last episode, CURRIE, according to him, allegedly, he got what he wanted from Priscilla, and once he did, then and only then, he took her to meet Elvis. So the author says, since the first day of school was September 10th, 1959, and Priscilla met Curie when the Beaulieus arrived in Germany in mid-August or so, she had to have been, allegedly, dallying with Curie for at least several weeks prior to the famous introduction. Now, Curie and Carol Grant, they give out a date of possibly Sunday, September 13th, 1959, when the famous meeting, the first introduction happened between Priscilla and Elvis. Some of Elvis's entourage, they've said over the years that it could have possibly happened as late as October, but most people in Elvis lore, in doing the research, and I also believe the author herself, puts the meeting sometime in mid-September 1959. Now, Curie Grant had been coaching Priscilla also on the way in the car with his wife Carol to that meeting, basically prepping her, telling her, be quiet, be demure, don't ask too many questions. He doesn't like it, because apparently there had been up to that point at least up to 13 to 15 girls that had met Elvis, and he was turned off by the ones that seemed to be overly chatty, just really intrusive with the questions, kind of basically girls that were overly fangirling on him, just made him uncomfortable and he didn't like it. So Curie was coaching Priscilla, and by all accounts, according to Curie and Carol, Curie's wife, in the car on the way to Bad Nauheim to meet Elvis, they were saying that she was like a chatty little teeny bopper, chewing gum, talking a mile a minute. What do I say? Do you think he'll like me? And he was basically trying to calm her down and get her off the ledge. Look, just don't talk too much. Just be quiet. Let him ask the questions. You just answer the questions. All that stuff. So now the stage is set. She's en route to meet Elvis. And the author says, Priscilla, true to her covert nature, did not tell a soul apart from her family that she was meeting Elvis Presley, the fantasy she had nurtured since she was 10 years old. And that's detailed in previous chapters about how Priscilla was indeed infatuated with Elvis Presley, according to the author and all the people in Priscilla's past that the author interviewed. Then again, she had few friends to tell. Like Elvis, she was a loner and lonely in emotional exile in Germany. He missing his mother who had just died, she mourning the father she had just discovered. Carol and Curie Grant picked Priscilla up at the Beaulieu home around 7 p.m. The 14-year-old was chewing bubblegum, Carol remembered, wearing an old-fashioned midday blouse and a wide skirt over a crinoline. And in Priscilla's book, she describes her outfit as a little blue and white sailor dress, basically making her look like the 14-year-old that she was. So the author goes on, Curie's distinct recollection was that school had begun, for Paul Beaulieu made a point of mentioning that it was a school night. Like Cinderella, Priscilla had a 12 o'clock curfew. That was the only admonition given. With that, the odd menage a trois, Curie, Carol, and Priscilla took off on the Autobahn for the hour's drive from Wiesbaden to Bad Nauheim, where Private Presley had taken a house. Priscilla, Curie recalled, was delirious, chattering like a little magpie. Will he like me? Is my outfit okay? Will he like my hair? And that was when they were, giving her the lowdown and telling her, look, just play it cool, basically. When, around 8 o'clock, they pulled up in front of the ordinary-looking two-story house that Elvis was occupying, a miraculous transformation occurred. Priscilla stepped out of the car, removed her bubblegum, and became a different person. And the author says that Carol Grant, Curie's wife, was just mystified by the sudden turnaround and the composure in Priscilla, how she could transform herself almost immediately from just this little, teeny bopper, gum-smacking teenager to all of a sudden she gets out of the car and she's just more of this mature, elegant, and composed woman who's just playing a part. Priscilla was performing her first and most important acting role. She had successfully imitated the Deborah Paget hairdo from Love Me Tender and taken direction from Curie, and these she blended with the learned behavior from her stage mother, Anne, and her own instinctive skill at manipulation. To a degree, Elvis Presley was set up for this legendary encounter, though no one dreamed anything serious would materialize. Now, in episode 5, I believe we go into who Deborah Paget was. That was Elvis's co-star on his first movie, Love Me Tender, that he fell madly and just passionately in love for. According to Deborah, her interviews with the author, he phoned her from the road when he was out traveling and asked Deborah to marry him. Deborah came from a very, very strict family, a very religious family, and Deborah wasn't innocent. She was a virgin when she was working with Elvis, was very shy, very religious, and she was basically Elvis's dream girl. Everything Elvis wanted in a woman, everything that Gladys Presley, his mother, told him to look for in a woman. A religious, God-fearing woman who was beautiful, who was modest. Deborah was everything that he wanted, looks-wise, personality-wise, spiritually, all of it. And unfortunately, their relationship never was meant to be. Deborah's parents were not thrilled with the idea that Elvis was a rock and roll singer. Her mother didn't want her to have anything to do with that. Years later, Deborah relays to the author that, even her mother, shortly before she died, told Deborah, had I known the extent of the love between you and Elvis, I definitely would have said that it was okay if you wanted to be engaged and eventually marry him. By both accounts, Elvis's and Deborah's, everything was quite innocent between the two. They would share long, soulful conversations, but Elvis did fall head over heels in love with Deborah. And even though Deborah was almost painfully shy, she later admitted that she felt exactly the same way about him. But tragically, it just, because of Deborah's strict mother, it just was not meant to be. But Elvis carried a torch for Deborah for years. And I talked about in that episode how Deborah and Pricilla Presley have a very eerie, striking physical similarity. Their faces are very, very similar. And a lot of people maintain, especially the author, that is why Elvis was so struck with Priscilla upon first sight. To him, it was the ghost of the lost memory of Deborah Paget. So when CURRIE and Carol and Priscilla get to the house, Elvis finally gets to see Priscilla for the first time. And both Priscilla and the author, in her interviews with the people present, they said that Elvis got a glimpse of her and then shot up like a rocket out of his seat. He could not take his eyes off of Priscilla. And CURRIE said that him and his wife, when they were there, they were just stunned at the way that he reacted to her. He thought, and so did his wife, that there probably wouldn't be anything that would come from the introduction, that Elvis would have probably said, oh, cute girl, whatever, and move on. They had no way of anticipating the intense reaction that Elvis would have over Priscilla. Now, according to the author, at the home the first night that Priscilla met Elvis, the people that were present were Elvis's grandmother, Minnie Mae Presley, his father, Vernon Presley. He had a German blonde secretary who was his occasional girlfriend. Her name was Elizabeth Stefanik. She was there. He also had another secretary named V. Harris and her husband who was there. Lamar Fike, who was one of his friends from Memphis, was there. And he also had an army buddy named Rex Mansfield, who was also there. But there were two people that Suzanne Finstad, the author, interviewed subsequently, independently of CURRIE. Joe Esposito, who a lot of us know as Elvis's right-hand man in the Memphis Mafia. He met Joe Esposito when he was in the army, and he became one of Elvis's best friends. And then also Charlie Hodge, who was another army mate of Elvis. They both told Suzanne Finstad that they were present, but CURRIE says in his interviews, no, they were not there. I do not remember them being there. So Elvis sees Priscilla and literally seems to go half out of his mind. And the author says, if you could have seen his face, CURRIE recollected, he jumped out of that chair like he was sitting on a hot plate. I had never seen him react to any girl like that. And I'd seen him meet at least 15 beautiful girls. He started bouncing off the walls. Priscilla's first impression was how extremely good looking Elvis was. I mean, he was even better looking than in Love Me Tender. That's her quote. As she stood in the doorway to the living room, anxiously talking in the scene before her, Elvis got up and walked the few steps toward her. He smiled and shook her hand, his leg twitching as it did when he was nervous. According to both Carol and CURRIE, who was standing right beside them, he stuttered, "Hi, I'm Elvis Pretzel." And Carol said, yeah, he was making a joke because Elvis was a big joker. And then the book goes on to say that he is talking to Priscilla, asking her how old she is, and she tells him, and he calls her a baby. And that's like a famous scene that Priscilla writes in Elvis and Me, where he's asking her and she tells him, and then he's like, "You're a baby." And she's like, "Oh, thanks a lot." And Elvis laughs at her and says, "Oh, well, it seems like you've got some spunk. That's good." So they're talking, and the book goes on. The moment would be remembered later by all who were present and by some who were not, as they sought a clue, some hidden insight into the profound impact of Priscilla's meeting with Elvis Presley. Priscilla's turn-of-the-century porcelain daintiness was powerfully erotic to Elvis Presley, an old-fashioned Southern boy for whom innocence, purity, and beauty were the ultimate aphrodisiacs, and Priscilla Beaulieu seemed to possess all of them. The deeper reason Elvis Presley was overcome when he first saw Priscilla would not surface for several months. When we were sitting around, about 4 of us, and we were talking about girls, recalled CURRIE Grant, CURRIE told Elvis he had been wondering what possessed him the night he met Priscilla. "He gave me that funny one-sided grin," recalled CURRIE. And this is Elvis's quote. "When you pulled her in here by the hand," Elvis responded, "what I saw was a young Deborah Pageant." That was the attraction so long searched for by biographers and other students of Elvis Presley. Priscilla's Love Me Tender hairstyle and eerie, which she copied from Deborah, an eerie facial resemblance to Deborah Pageant triggered memories of Elvis's unrequited love for his former co-star. "He was flipped over Deborah," confirmed Joe Esposito. "From the stories I was told by him and some other people, he carried a torch for Deborah all during the making of that movie and even after, but it never happened. Perhaps when he saw Priscilla Beaulieu, Deborah's apparent reincarnation, Elvis felt he had been given a second chance." Now, I know some of you in the comments are going to be asking, why don't I show a picture of Deborah Pageant? I had a whole series on my channel about Errol Flynn when I was reading a book called Errol Flynn Slept Here, and I peppered every single episode, all 13, with wonderful photos of Errol. He was a devastatingly handsome devil of a man, okay? So there was a lot of really nice, beautiful photos of the man. And I got a strike on my channel for one picture that I used from 1943 in a short from an hour-long video, a YouTube short. And that, to me, was a warning shot. So, that's why I had to take that entire series down. There's so many photos of him, and how could I know what was, protected material from that studio or not? There's no way that I could know or not. So if we're talking about pictures of Deborah and the specific hairstyle that she wore in that movie, Love Me Tender, that's the hairstyle that Priscilla copied because she found out when she saw that movie, a teenager back in Texas, that he was infatuated with her because she read that story in movie magazines. Elvis was giving interviews to movie magazines when he was starring with Deborah and making the film and calling Deborah the most beautiful, wonderful woman he had ever met in his life. So of course, Priscilla, being the little covert, operation that she is, she's going to do everything she can to become what her fantasy idol Elvis likes. So that's why we're at where we're at now with this. And I would just say Google Deborah Pageant in Love Me Tender. Okay. And you will see exactly what I am talking about when I tell you that Priscilla and Deborah looked eerily alike. It's quite crazy. So in the book, Elvis and Me, that was published in 1985, Priscilla talks about how Elvis was behaving like a little nervous schoolboy, playing piano, desperately trying to get her attention, just singing songs at the piano. And she noticed that whenever she would look down and then look up, she could see him trying to get her attention. And she was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe Elvis is trying to get my attention, little old me. And the author tells us that, CURRIE and different people that she had interviewed during that night all really felt that Elvis was like head over heels about this girl. They'd never seen him act like this about anybody. And Priscilla herself, she tells the author that she was kind of nervous, yes, but somewhat indifferent in a way because she didn't really understand or know how she felt about him. She was just kind of like, I don't know what to make of this whole situation. So the author even says, what few people realize is that Priscilla did not have the same feelings for Elvis. She had yearned in her teenage desperation to meet her idol, but now that she was face to face with the man, she didn't fall in love at first sight. No, she acknowledged later. No, there was definitely a pull there. The energy was very electric, but not in the sense that this is it. What Priscilla did feel upon meeting Elvis Presley was that she had discovered finally the source of her strange premonition of destiny, the reason she had felt drawn to Germany. You know, she reflected when she was 50, I've gone through that night many, many times. It was a setup that was meant to be. It was something that, again, the power, that drawing power that I felt that night. So for her, it was more of a feeling of belonging, of importance, of destiny than her relaying that I saw him and fell head over heels in love with him the first moment I saw. So we can see from this book, from Suzanne's interviews with Priscilla, that Priscilla is maintaining a level of coolness. Priscilla is trying to maintain this quiet, demure persona even to this day, almost trying to position herself as being a little bit standoffish and maybe finding him a little off-putting. And, you know, she doesn't know what to make of the situation and she's just kind of trying to figure everything out. But again, always trying to portray herself as being the calm, cool, level-headed one who wasn't a desperate fan, wasn't desperate to meet him. And, you know, of course, in my opinion, she's maintaining this to directly refute the account of a CURRIE grant, right? CURRIE is maintaining that she would go to any lengths to meet her idol Elvis Presley, and did, because she, you know, was dallying with him for several weeks before he decided to take her to meet him in the first place. And, you know, I'm sure over the years, Priscilla has heard the different interviews that, you know, people have relayed that that's why Elvis was so fascinated with her, was that because she was the spitting image embodiment of Deborah Pageant. I'm sure that doesn't do much for Priscilla's ego, so she would never talk about or acknowledge that rumor. So CURRIE says that Priscilla could have gotten an Academy Award for her performance at the house that night, that she was just so calm, she was collected, and she was really, really, really playing that part. So the night's going on, and the author tells us that Priscilla told her that I didn't have a lot to talk about with them, meaning all the adults and Elvis at the house that night. I just remember being very nervous. It was just so out of my realm of being a teenager. End quote. Priscilla spent the evening, as she would much of her remaining adolescence and early adulthood, silently observing. And you know, to be fair and to give Priscilla a little bit of cred here, of course, I think that she, you know, being a 14-year-old teenager, probably did feel a little awkward, nervous, and out of her realm. But again, if you've been with me since the beginning, you would know that Priscilla could actually be quite aggressive and fiercely determined if she saw something that she wanted, going after it, that she could be competitive. A lot of her schoolmates have relayed this information about her. So we do know that there's that duality to her personality, in that when she wants something and she wants to go after it, she's determined she'll do it. But yet at the same time, she can basically meld and morph her personality to her surroundings. And you know, if she wants something and she was told by CURRIE that you behave like this around Elvis, be quiet, be demure, play the part. Of course, being that fiercely competitive and driven woman that she eventually became. So it's this competitiveness and this drive to go after what she wants that would really explain that duality in her that night, how she could be in the car ride home, just like this little teeny bopper, cracking the gum, couldn't wait to meet Elvis. But then when she gets there, playing the part of that almost coquettish, demure, much more mature girl in order to catch his eye and capture Elvis's attention, right? That's just my opinion on it. So as the night goes on, the author talks about how Elvis is just literally behaving like a schoolboy, that, you know, Priscilla's out in the living room. He goes into the kitchen and he's in there with several of his friends, cracking the door, looking out to her going, oh my gosh, she's so beautiful. She's so wonderful. Can you believe it? She just looks like this little porcelain doll. She looks like everything I've ever wanted physically in a woman. And oh my gosh, I mean, he was fangirling over her. And also there's another thing that's really contested, because in Priscilla's account, in in Elvis and Me of the night that she met Elvis, she talks about specifically always being downstairs with Elvis that first night, that she, was talking to him in the living room, and then their conversation eventually went from the living room to the kitchen, and she was in there with Elvis's grandmother, Minnie Mae, while she was making Elvis 5 enormous bacon sandwiches or something with a lot of mustard, and he's eating in there, talking to her, and that it was all on the up and up. In Child Bride, Suzanne Finstad says that the very first night that Priscilla and Elvis met, she ended up alone with him in his bedroom. Now again, Priscilla says that did not happen in Elvis and Me. In Elvis and Me, this is what Priscilla said. So, she's talking to him all night. She's in the kitchen with him, just answering all these questions that Elvis is firing to her about what are all the kids liking in the music scene today, because he was very insecure about, he was at the height of his fame and popularity when he was drafted, and then he was very nervous that those 2 years out of the public eye, he would just slip in popularity and that no one would care about him anymore, even though Colonel Tom Parker had strategically made sure that they had recorded and released kind of like drip-fed singles while he was gone to just keep him kind of active and in the public eye. But she says that she's just talking to him, and then she says, this is from Elvis and Me. She says, it felt like we'd just begun talking when CURRIE came in and pointed to his watch. I had dreaded that moment. The evening had gone so fast. It seemed I had just arrived, and now I was being hurried away. Elvis and I had just started to get to know each other. I felt like Cinderella, knowing that when my curfew came, all this magic would end. I was surprised when Elvis asked CURRIE if I could possibly stay longer. When CURRIE explained the agreement with my father, Elvis casually suggested that maybe I could come by again. Though I wanted to more than anything in the world, I didn't believe that it would happen. And then she talks about getting home at 2 a.m. that night, and her parents, had waited up and they wanted to know everything. And she just basically said, oh, Elvis was, the perfect gentleman. And I was just, so happy that I got to meet him. But she says in her book that she didn't really think that anything would come from that meeting. According to Cary Grant, to the author Suzanne Finstad, in Child Bride, this is the account according to the author. So Priscilla is in the living room with Elvis, and CURRIE and his wife Carol return to the living room, and they notice that, quote, Elvis had Priscilla backed up against the wall and he was kissing her. By 8:30 or so, Elvis was taking her upstairs to his bedroom. Priscilla would later claim publicly that she and Elvis were downstairs all evening talking, but others who were in the house remember them disappearing to Elvis's upstairs room. Priscilla later admitted this to Mike Edwards. Mike Edwards was a boyfriend that she had for 7 years after Elvis's death. We talked about him before. He just took her by the hand, went up the stairs, and said, we'll be down later, CURRIE recalled, and she just went right with him. That's when I began to worry because I know Elvis. There were many times when he'd taken girls up there. He had no idea of timing, and I had to get this girl back by midnight. Now, CURRIE makes a point of telling the author that he was literally freaking out, pacing the floor, like, I have got to get this girl back on time. I'm in the Air Force. Her father, Priscilla's father, was also in the Air Force. He was a captain. He was CURRIE's superior, and he was like, I cannot screw this up. He was freaking out. And again, so many different accounts. I said in the last episode how Donna Presley, who has her own channel here on YouTube, is very staunch in her defense of Elvis in saying that there was absolutely no way that Elvis could have taken Priscilla to his bedroom because her grandmother, Minnie Mae Presley, did not run that kind of household, that was a very strict Christian household. There would be no way that hanky-panky like that would be going on. I've thought about that, and I know that Donna says that on her channel, but Donna unfortunately wasn't there. I mean, who knows? There's so many different accounts as to what is going on here, from family members to people that were there. But by all accounts, the people that were there, even Priscilla herself, says that she did eventually go to Elvis's bedroom, although Priscilla says it was the second visit, not the first. But I'm just presenting everyone's scenarios and, statements about this early time in Germany between Elvis and Priscilla. You can definitely make your own judgments and opinions as to what went down. Okay, so the author goes on and she says that there were clearly psychological and emotional undercurrents to the attraction within Elvis, for he felt instantly intimate with Priscilla in a manner that surprised even her. He was very lonely over there, she said, in the 70s, and he wanted to talk to someone, and he trusted me. For some reason, he really trusted me, and he poured his heart out. I look back now and I go, my gosh, I was so young, and I was only 14 years old. How did that trust develop? I mean, how? Why did he? But he did. That she was a young girl, a stranger, sharing intimacies with a 24-year-old international movie star. She was the practical one in the relationship, even then. But she talks about how on that first night that they just immediately hit it off, that they did talk and joke around for hours, and that he even said that he had never felt that way, that struck in meeting someone and feeling that close, that he could just open up that quickly. And he basically just poured his heart out to her, talking about, the tragedy of just losing his mother months before. By all accounts, he just really missed his old life back in the States, felt very, very lonely, was upset and confused about what was going to happen to his career once he got out of the army, but mostly just sharing the sorrows of the loneliness of losing his mother, because Elvis and his mother Gladys had a very, very close relationship, and he was her confidant, he was her everything, and she looked out for him in every way imaginable. And so after she was gone, he was just really, really torn up about it. Now, in the book, Currie Grant tells the author that he basically grilled Priscilla after that first night, wanting to know in detail what was going on between Elvis and Priscilla up in the bedroom. She tells him that it was mostly talking, but that they were kissing very gently, and that Elvis was touching her, but just kind of like, feeling her up, so to speak, but that apparently it didn't go any further than that. The author says, no one present at the house that night said a word about Priscilla Beaulieu being 14 years old, either before or after Elvis disappeared with her into his bedroom. It was not even discussed, Rex Mansfield confirmed, because she was there with her parents' approval. Such was the power of Elvis Presley. It was just a whole different world, Rex said, what that world he was in. Conventional rules were not enforced, and no one questioned the propriety. Is it disturbing that he had a relationship with a 14-year-old girl? Yes, it is disturbing. In episode 9, I go into talking about the fact that Elvis was 24 and Priscilla was 14. I also go into detail about how I feel in my heart of hearts. I don't really feel like Elvis was a predatory person, in the sense that his intentions towards Priscilla were dishonorable in the way that Currie's were. Although we do have to acknowledge that, yes, there was a substantial age difference there that would probably really bother any parent. Priscilla's parents didn't seem that concerned. And we also know that the cultural norms back in the day, people were getting married a lot younger. And actually, by 1950s standards, to be 24 and unmarried, Elvis was 24 and unmarried at the time, he was probably considered a late bloomer. A lot of people got married out of high school, directly out of high school back then, 30s, 40s, 50s. My own maternal grandmother got married at age 14 to my grandfather, who was 23 or 24 at the time. It was an arranged marriage in the little Ukrainian village that they were living in Manitoba, Canada at the time. She was born in 1903, whole different thing. But yes, I acknowledge wholeheartedly that it is a very sticky thing to talk about now. It is an uncomfortable thing to talk about now. The only thing that makes me feel better about the situation was he did eventually marry Priscilla. And by all accounts of everyone that the author was interviewing, Elvis basically told everyone who was present there that night that he had been looking for someone like Priscilla his entire life. Most of us now know in reading this book that it probably had a lot more to do with the fact that she looked like the long lost memory of Deborah Paget, but still, he did feel close to her, and he still did talk about her in a way that he didn't talk about any other girl save Deborah up to that point. So it's just something that is just uncomfortable, and I get it. I completely get it. There would be no way that any daughter of mine would be chaperoned by two people that I barely know. I don't care if we're a military family and they're a military family. It's like there is no way in holy hell that a child of mine would have been in that situation. But the author has told us that her parents were just as starstruck as she was, contrary to Priscilla's narrative this whole time that, oh, her parents were super strict, that they weren't even Elvis fans. Everyone that Suzanne has interviewed for this book says hell to the no, that they were very, very starstruck by the fact that she was going to go meet Elvis Presley. So wrapping up this chapter, Priscilla is up in Elvis's bedroom, and it says the only one who expressed concern that night was CURRIE, given the fact that it was getting so late, that she was up in Elvis's bedroom talking with him and, kissing and all that. CURRIE, because he expected to face the wrath of Priscilla's father, an Air Force captain, and his superior if he brought her home past midnight. At 11:30, I started pacing the floor, okay? And he was pacing the floor, and then they came down after 1 a.m. It says Elvis and Priscilla came downstairs. They were holding hands. Elvis seemed reluctant to let her go and basically, told CURRIE, bring her back. And not only that, but he escorted her out the front door. And CURRIE said he never did that for anybody. So he said, bring her back, CURRIE. And CURRIE was like, yeah, I'll try. Freaking out, like, I got to get this girl back home. So now they're in the car on the way home, and it says, once inside the car, Priscilla seemed to be in a mild state of shock, CURRIE recalled. She questioned the Grants endlessly. Do you think he likes me? Do you think he likes me? All the way back, CURRIE said. And CURRIE said he basically said to her, look, he likes you. Yes, he likes you. He wouldn't have taken you upstairs to his room if he didn't like you. He wanted alone time with you. He definitely liked you. And CURRIE also says, very interestingly, that at that point, the performance had ended, that she was no longer acting, demure and quiet. She was back to this, bubbly teenager who was just like a little chatty Cathy doll. So, CURRIE's on the Autobahn, driving back to Wiesbaden, freaking out. And then he says he gets there, and Paul Beaulieu, Priscilla's dad, kind of hardly said anything, was kind of just giving him a funny look and saying, oh, it's a bit late, but that was it. And it says, CURRIE seemed more concerned about the late hour than Anne Beaulieu did. That's Priscilla's mom. Far from being disturbed by her 14-year-old daughter's midnight date with Elvis Presley, Priscilla's mother was thrilled. Her cousin Margaret later recalled, she wrote me from Germany, meaning Anne, and said, guess who Priscilla met? Elvis Presley. She was all excited, saying that Priscilla had met Elvis Presley, and it was a really big deal. Anne seemed unfazed by the difference in Elvis and Priscilla's ages or by the monumental chasm between them in life experiences. Pricilla Beaulieu may have looked older and played older than her 14 years, but as Martha Smith, her 8th grade English teacher from Texas, like this author, I gotta tell you, as Martha Smith said, quote, she was just a little girl to me. Back then, little girls were little girls. Priscilla told CURRIE the next time they spoke that she lay in bed wide awake after he dropped her off. She couldn't even sleep. She was so excited. There are 2 tragedies in life, George Bernard Shaw wrote. One is to lose your heart's desire. The other is to gain it. Pricilla Beaulieu was too young at 14 to appreciate the irony of thanking God for unanswered prayers. So as we can see for what now, chapter 8, chapter 9, and chapter 10, the accounts here surrounding CURRIE and Priscilla's relationship, CURRIE's characterization of their relationship and the timeline and everything that happened, what he says, and all of Priscilla's timelines and her accounts, they don't mesh. They don't mesh at all. Priscilla's have changed over the years. Her accounts change. The details, timelines seem to change. She seems very just obscure on details that you think she would be a little bit more hardcore focused on. CURRIE's accounts, let's just call it what it is. CURRIE's accounts are R-rated. Priscilla's are all G-rated. And again, what does CURRIE have to stand to gain other than looking like a complete ophile and a snake, right? Someone who was deliberately trying to deflower a 14-year-old girl. I mean, let's call it what it is. Whereas Priscilla, CURRIE even told the author, she has so much more to lose because she's built her persona, her image, her empire on the fact that she was a pure virginal girl when she met him and remained so until their wedding. Now, of course, Priscilla wants to preserve her good name, and she wants to preserve Elvis's name and his image and likeness, because for a long time she was in charge of Elvis Presley Enterprises before Lisa Marie sold. She does have a lot more to lose in the sense of just this whole character that she's built over the years. And I've talked about this in previous episodes where, in 1985, she wrote Elvis and Me. And then recently, last fall, 2025, she released her second memoir called Softly As I Leave You, which was her life after Elvis account, whereas Elvis and Me was, her accounts of her childhood, meeting Elvis, living with Elvis, and basically the divorce and his death. Softly As I Leave You is supposed to pick up from there, but everyone is saying there's nothing new here. Everything that she has maintained over the years in all of her carefully crafted interviews, it's all the same. They didn't really feel that there was any real opening up. So many opportunities for Priscilla to kind of come clean, so to speak, because again, so many conflicting and countering narratives and accounts that characterize Priscilla and Elvis's relationship to be something that, was not the way that Priscilla described it year after year after year ad nauseum in her books and in her interviews. Child Bride being one of them. The author interviewed over 300 people, many of whom, including CURRIE, even though she sued the guy, that are saying that this is not how it happened. And there were so many people also that were saying that when Priscilla wrote that book, Softly As I Leave You, in 2025, that she also did it to refute her own daughter's narrative. Lisa Marie Presley wrote her own book called Into the Great Unknown, where she characterizes her relationship with her mother as not being very good. She talks about suffering at the hands of one of her mother's boyfriends by the name of Mike Edwards, SA, abuse, while he was living with Lisa and Priscilla. And, so many people are like, Priscilla is only interested in preserving her own image, her own good name, rather than just coming clean, rather than just breaking it down for us and telling us, here's my life. These are my choices. This is what I was going through. At this point, who cares if Priscilla were to write in a book that, my parents were starstruck and they pushed me into something that they probably shouldn't have, being a young, impressionable 14-year-old girl, that maybe I wasn't protected in the way that I needed to be at that time. She's told us over the years she wasn't a fan. She liked him, but, wasn't like this. Elvis wasn't a huge thing to her. But yet so many accounts in these books and in these interviews that the author gave are telling us that that wasn't the case, that she was indeed infatuated with him. Why not just say, I was infatuated with Elvis. I was head over heels in love with him when I first heard his records and saw him on television. It was everything to me. He was my fantasy come true. Meeting him, it was such a thing. It's like she's so intent on making, in my opinion, this is all my opinion, but she's so intent on dying on this sword of just, she's this calm, cool, collected, virginal girl from this strict family and kind of didn't want any of this. And it was just kind of thrown in her lap. What would it do to her reputation if indeed she did hotly pursue Elvis, right? If indeed her parents were pushing her into a relationship with him because they were starstruck as well. It's just, to me, it's just so very sad. And hey, look, I'm not trying to present Priscilla Presley as being, the devil here. So many people I know don't like her, think that she's a horrible person. But here's the thing. In a lot of ways, I do feel that Priscilla was just a victim of her own circumstances. At 14 years old, you don't have the emotional and intellectual wherewithal to make the best decisions for your life moving forward. You're not making grown-up decisions that can affect your life at 14 with any kind of emotional intelligence or certainty, okay? But then again, by so many accounts, she was a very driven and calculated personality, even from a very, very young age. And there's so many accounts of her being promiscuous, of her acting very, very mature, much more mature than her tender age of 14, that she had that emotional intelligence to be able to be very driven to get what she wanted when she wanted. So it was a combination of so many things. And I go back to that one thing that I really, really had a problem with when her mother and her stepfather concealed the identity of her birth father from her for over a decade. And when she found that out, in my opinion, it really shaped her. It emotionally crippled her, in my opinion. It made her realize that she couldn't trust the people around her that she had to really, really overcompensate and make sure that she was the one in the driver's seat, always making the best decisions for herself, that she couldn't rely on anyone. And moreover, her mom just committed her to secrecy, begged for her silence. Please don't talk about the fact that I've disclosed your true birth father to you. Let's keep that from your stepfather. We don't want to hurt him. She's learning, like the author says, she's learning to bend the knee to her mother and to keep up secrets, and everything is always this covert operation. Nothing is out in the open, and it's all about keeping up appearances and maintaining what seems to be an outward strong facade, where on the inside you are really dying, yet feeling let down and betrayed by her mother, then going out and trying to carve out her own existence in a way that probably wasn't very physically or emotionally healthy for her, in the way that she was being aggressive in junior high, pursuing boys, according to a lot of these interviewees, going out and acting in a way that wasn't befitting of a young girl in middle school. So there's just so many layers here. Again, this is my opinion. Also, this is the opinion of all the people that Suzanne Finstad interviewed for this book. As I've mentioned before, Pricilla Presley herself just denies all of this. She withdrew her consent from the book. She did not want to participate in the writing of this book once she saw the direction that Suzanne was going, the in-depth direction that Suzanne was going. But mind you, never sued the author, never sued the publisher. So I know this was a long one, you guys, but it was an important one because it's this fateful meeting that really changes Priscilla and Elvis's life forever, sets them on a course for everything to follow. And at its core, you've got these warring narratives. You have Priscilla's, that she was just this naive little 14-year-old girl who was very prim, very proper. All this was thrust upon her. She just couldn't grasp that she was, enamored of this man, Elvis Presley. He was enamored of her. It was just like this roller coaster that she couldn't control. She talks about it in her own book. She talks about being infatuated with him from the very beginning, whereas decades later, she's telling Suzanne that she wasn't really sure how she felt about him. She was just kind of, wow, like not knowing what to make about all of this. You see how her narrative changes over and over? And you've got these dueling narratives, and Priscilla's has always been that she was just this prim little proper girl that had all this thrust upon her. And as Child Bride is telling us, was that really the case? Was she really just kind of almost a victim of circumstance, just this happenstance, this fairy tale meeting? Or was it something that was deeper? Was it something that was calculated? Was it something that she really wanted? Was it something that her family, particularly her mother, really wanted? I don't really understand, given the amount of evidence in this book that would speak to the truth of the second narrative. I don't really understand why this many decades later, Priscilla just doesn't come clean to us, doesn't find it fitting at this point to just open up to us and give us the reality of her life and her life choices. We're not going to really find it in Elvis and Me and in Softly As I Leave You, in my opinion. So that's why this book is so unbelievably fascinating. Again, I do not have anything personally against Priscilla. For whatever reason, what has driven Priscilla all these years is what continues to drive her. And in my opinion, it is the strong desire to control, wanting to control everything surrounding her, her story, and just what she wants to be the legacy of her and Elvis. So thank you guys so much for joining me on this one. This one kind of gave me a little bit of a headache. It's just kind of a doozy, and it is all over the place. The next chapter is going to be called Priscilla in Wonderland. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I can't wait to see you on the next one. Please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't. I would love to have you. Thank you so much, and I will talk to you very, very soon. Bye.